Want to keep your dollars and cents? Then download the Sense app from the Office of Financial Readiness. That's Sense, S-E-N, money sign, E, to save for retirement, build credit, create a spending plan, or buying a home. You can't do any of those things without money. So if you have sense, you'll download the Sense app. That's S-E-N, money sign, E, today. And be sure to follow at DoD FinRed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Our nation's military was in the spotlight as we withdrew American forces from Afghanistan. In Part 1 and 2 of our Afghan Evacuation series, we told the story of military veterans trying to evacuate their partners and allies by personally guiding buses into Kabul airport and working with the UAE to get those people out of the country, as well as veterans coordinating evacuation efforts from their own homes. Some with nothing more than a cell phone, a whiteboard, and the professional network they've built over the years. In this, our third and final episode in the series, Jack Murphy talks with Mick Mulroy, a former member of the CIA, to discuss their role in the Afghan evacuation and to look at this crisis from a perspective other than just from the military. This is the full interview between Jack Murphy and Mick Mulroy.
I am recording here with Mick Mulroy, who formerly served with the CIA as a Paramilitary Operations Officer, and then you were counterterrorism advisor on the National Security Council.
I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East.
That's right.
Under Secretary Mattis and Esper.
So, Mick, what I wanted to talk to you about today is the evacuation effort from Afghanistan, and we've been interviewing various veterans and other groups, people who have aided in the evacuation effort. And there's a whole other side, I feel, that it's been touched on a little bit in the press, but not a lot, is that the CIA really went above and beyond, from what I can tell, to evacuate their host nation partner force, the NDS units, commando units, that the agency had trained and worked for with many years. So that's like a whole other side of the story that, you know, as much as possible, I'd really like to hear about. And I think our listeners would like to hear about too.
Yeah, Jack. So first, great to be talking to you. I, as you know, are limited in exactly what I can talk about. So what I'll try to talk about is the stuff that I was involved with as a civilian, just as so many of our fellow vets were trying to get their former partners out. And some of those did include the NDS Special Missions Unit, which is known as CTPT. And then, of course, I can just talk about stuff that was in the media that's been reported, and not confirm or deny it, but, you know, essentially, you know, talk about it from that point of view. But I do agree with your the premise of your question that the agency, my former agency, really did step up and do everything they could to get the people that we promised we would out. I'm not saying it was perfect. I don't know that anybody could have been perfect under the scenario that, you know, was essentially dealt the military and the agency. But I think they did a Herculean job to do as much as they could. And that makes a former CIA guy proud.
Do you have any sense of like how that came together as far as when the situation really started to collapse in Afghanistan? I mean, what the steps were and sort of how it kind of logistically even came together with the agency trying to get their guys out versus the DoD effort. Not to say that they were opposed to one another, but it sounds like it was two parallel efforts almost.
So I think on the conventional side of the military, it might be somewhat of a parallel effort with the agency supporting it as much. On the military special operations side, particularly the JSOC units, they're very closely aligned with the CIA's effort out there. By aligned, I mean in coordination. So a lot of the individuals that we're talking about that we got out also had very close connections, personal connections, worked alongside with a lot of JSOC. So in that, it was a completely hand in glove effort, I believe. And I would say these units really formed after the fall of the Taliban and, you know, Northern Alliance, and they had spent 20 years learning the trade and actually became extraordinarily effective at fighting the Taliban. which of course put them as like the top guys to kill, once the Taliban took back over. And that's an important point to make. Between the commandos and the CTPTs, those were I think the top tier targets for the Taliban. And that really made them critical to help, because they were going to go out first. They also, quite frankly, know quite a lot of information, right? So from a operational security, you don't want any of these guys, fall into the hands of not just the Taliban, but likely the Pakistani intelligence service, which I think is working hand in glove with the Taliban and has the entire time. So it made it absolutely critical for the agency to, one, keep our promise, and two, ensure that we didn't leave a lot of people behind that could be really damaging to our national security from what they knew and what they learned.
It's really interesting, too, in the regard that, the CIA has a reputation, rightly or wrongly, and the military does, too, to a large extent, rightly in some regards, like what happened with the Montagnards after Vietnam, this reputation that we just cut and run, that we just leave our allies in the lurch and peel out, and they're screwed while we fly back to Fortress America. But this seems like it definitely goes against the public perception, if nothing else, that we just abandon people.
Yeah, it's funny you should bring that up, Jack, because my partner, Eric Ulrich, and I are actually doing a documentary on the war in Laos, and I'll make it real short because it's really about the point of your question, but the CIA came out and hired a bunch of smoke jumpers to help them in Laos because of, dropping munitions and people in very small areas. The smoke jumpers were better at it than the military. The military is used to dropping battalions. So these guys, they end up, going to this war in Laos, and, they told their families are up in Alaska fighting fires, and they're really in Laos, and a lot of them died, a lot of them perished. And, the main point of the reason I bring it up is they became extraordinarily attached to their partner force. And when they came back, they spent their own money to bring them here. So if you go to Missoula on a Saturday during the summer and you go to the farmer's market, you're going to see a whole bunch of people that don't really look like they're originally from Montana, because they're not. They're Hmong, and they're from Laos. And there's this whole population of Hmong now in Montana. And it started with these guys who, on their own dime, brought them over here. So I do think there's a history of the U.S. policy decision makers usually with when they decide they're over, and they don't do enough to help those that fought alongside us. But in the past, whether, the Green Berets in Vietnam with the Montagnards that are now in North Carolina, or the Hmong up here in Montana, the guys that actually did the work aren't going to give up on them. And every guy we interviewed, and this was before this happened, brought that up. That if we intend to be partners, we have to actually be partners. If we're going to go into a next conflict, we expect to build a partner force, they have to trust them. Mm-hmm. And they have to actually trust the policymakers, because I think they trust the guys that are fighting alongside them inherently. So I bring that up, that we have a history of both. We have a history of abandoning people, and we have a history of the veterans, be they military or intel, not abandoning. I mean, we talked to and just one last story on that. We talked to the first Hmong that was brought back. He was brought back, a guy that's pretty famous named Jerry Daniels. We used to call him Hog Daniels. Paid for him to get a trailer in Missoula with his wife. No money. Bought all his groceries until he got him a job. This guy now owns like 20 stores throughout California. His daughter graduated from Harvard. His son graduated from MIT. Not that going to those schools with all that, all that bag of chips, but for a guy who literally got off the plane with 2 nickels in his pocket, that's kind of the American dream, right? Not bad. So I hope our Afghan, brothers that come over here with their families will do the same. They'll embed in the United States. They'll become part of the fabric of our society, and they'll be damn good citizens. But we have a history of that, to the point of your question, and we saw it in spades in this evacuation from Afghanistan.
Are you a military spouse? MilSpouse Money Mission educates and empowers those whom service members rely on most. So if you're the household 6, captain of the homestead, leader of the domicile, check out Mil-Spouse Money Mission from the Office of Financial Readiness. Also, they have an app, Sense app, SEN money sign E, to save for retirement, build credit, create a spending plan, or buying a home. If the last year taught us anything, it was how important it is to save for a rainy day or a COVID year. So if you have any sense, you'll download the Sense app. That's SEN money sign E today. And be sure to follow at DoD FinRed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
What was this like for you personally in regards to Afghanistan? As you were talking to the NDS guys, the Afghans, some of the Americans, others we've talked to, they were speaking to the interpreters, maybe some of their like Kandak commandos or other Afghan partner forces. But you speaking to the guys who worked for the Afghan intelligence agency, what was that like for you putting that together, and how were you able to integrate and help those guys out?
So for me, and I don't think it was much different than a lot of other guys, I had kept in touch with a lot of these guys. So when I was in the agency, obviously they frowned on that, but I retired. I retired overtly because of my job in the Pentagon. I was kind of publicly known. And then, I wasn't on social media until then. But then once I was on social media, I ended up friends with a lot of the former NDS soldiers that came to the United States, right? I mean, I even brought them to the Pentagon. A lot of them lived in Northern Virginia. So I bring up one I introduced to the Secretary of Defense. That was kind of cool, But so I knew them. I kept in touch with them. They were spread across the United States. A lot of them got their citizenship. So it was leading up into the actual decision to withdraw. I had talked to a lot of them because they were getting very nervous. Would we actually withdraw? Would we leave our residual force? Because, in my estimation, and I think most of them, if we left a force that was capable of enabling them to keep fighting, they would keep fighting. And I think that was a mistake, but, we're here more to talk about something else. But they, I think, thought the same thing. We had 5,000 U.S. servicemen and women. We had 7,000 to 8,000 NATO servicemen. We had thousands of contractors, and we had a sizable component of the agency. We're a small agency, but we certainly contributed a lot to that fight. In their estimation and mine, we could have kept the fight from the Taliban. We could have kept what we gained. It might not have been perfect, but that's Afghanistan. So there was a lot of discussion back and forth before the ultimate decision. And then after that, the conversation for me, not just with the people that were here, but also people that were there, was them sending me information about them fighting. Like it was almost like they wanted to show that the media was not right, that they were out there fighting. I don't think they did it other than to show, there was even pictures of a lot of dead guys, in our units because they were getting surrounded, because the air component cut off, the contractors were gone. And essentially that's what happened, in my opinion. They were trained to fight like we do, with, an air component, close air support, air mobility. And they rely on that for medevac, close air support, all that. And they didn't have it anymore. They just instantly got cut off. So all these units that were kind of far out there in these forward operating bases found themselves completely surrounded. So the next plan from them was to fall back to the Kabul region and basically have Fortress Kabul, hold the line. And then we saw the president get on a plane and depart. And I think that's when everything just fell apart. And that's when I personally started getting, the messaging, like, how do I get out of here? They're after me. They got it, all that kind of stuff. And I kind of collectively got with another group of guys that I knew, which eventually became Dunkirk, TF Dunkirk, Green Berets, MARSOC, Marines, Rangers, SEALs, just a group of guys that kind of had the exact same issue. So we were looking for, how are you dealing with this? Because the only thing I'm telling them is to go to the airport. And then I think it happened almost, simultaneously across all these groups. It's this coordination with the people that were on the airport. It's setting these guys up to be able to get to where they needed to get to, use a signal to get on the airport, avoiding checkpoints, avoiding this. All that happened I think for all of us, almost spontaneously. And if it wasn't for that case, I can't imagine how many people would not have gotten to the airport. So it was a collective effort, a team effort. I was just proud to be a little part of it. And I think my experience was very similar to a lot of guys.
So it was primarily taking those NDS guys you were in touch with and kind of funneling them to the airport and making sure they got on an airplane there.
That's right. Yeah, there was one that, really, it was the first one that I remember actually seeing that were rails up kind of thing. But this guy I had known from my time there. We had gone out on a patrol. It was like 2010. And it just so happened we went by his village. And we stopped there to drink chai and all that stuff that I'm sure you're very familiar with, But his compound was there. So he said, hey, I want to show you something. And we walked into, his part of the compound. And on the wall was two former paramilitary guys that had been killed out there 8 years earlier. So a former Delta operator and a former SEAL that became paramilitary operations or specialist and were killed in an ambush in 2002-3. Chief Carlson and Chris Mueller. So their pictures were on the wall, which, I knew that was odd. I mean, Muslims generally don't keep pictures of people anywhere in their house. And in Afghanistan, there's not pictures on the wall. So the reason I'm telling you that is that same person reached out to me. He had gotten out. He'd been injured several times. He'd gotten out. So he probably wasn't on top of the list as an active person. So I was trying to help him get to the airport. And literally, the last thing the guy said is, I'm at the airport, and I just want you to know I brought the pictures.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So, for me, it was like, well, God, that explains why we're doing this. You know what I mean? Sorry, I'm not supposed to cuss, I'm sure.
No, it's okay.
You can block that.
Did you guys, and I'm also curious about the agency itself, were you also having to get out like the family, there's wives and there's kids that you're also having to get out of there with them?
Yeah, that was and it still is. And I helped a lot of Afghans, not just the ones that I knew or the units that were in. I mean, a lot. And soldiers, the CAMDAC guys, just because, if they reach out to me, I'm not going to screen them for the fact they were in one group or another. I mean, they help, And I think the biggest problem that we've seen is these guys are like, I'm not leaving without my family. And then, we're talking with State Department people and like, look, people's definition of family can take this from exponentially increase the numbers that they have to deal with. Right. So I get it from both sides. If it was you or I over there, would we leave our sister? It's tough. It's tough, to get yourself and your wife and your kids out, but you can't get your sister and your brother and your mother. And I mean, it is hard. We did have to deal with a lot of families, and that made it, exponentially more complicated. But I don't think we should have been put in that situation. By we, I mean the whole enterprise.
Yeah.
I think we should have told the Taliban, stay out of Kabul. We still have Bagram. If you start approaching Kabul, we're going to go back into engaging you, and we'll go back into a conflict because we're going to pull out of all of our AMSITs or special undergrad visas, obviously our diplomatic corps and everything before we would ever give up a military capability like Bagram Air Base. It's water under the bridge. Can't change that now. But
what was the deal with the NDS unit that kind of held the line at Kabul International Airport? Because it sounds like those guys made a huge difference out there.
Yeah, and that's been reported. So I think it's important to point out just how, these guys probably could have got out way early, and they, to my understanding from the reporting, they essentially stayed there to the end and made sure that everybody else got to the airport on a plane and out. And they were, if there was another iconic picture like the one of the senior Army officer getting on the plane at the end, it would have been them, right? The last Afghans that fought to the end and literally served until they had to get on the plane to fly out of there. And that's the way I remember that unit. There's so many of my friends that are alive today because of the bravery of somebody in those units, because we fight, with very few Americans and, quite frankly, a lot more Afghans. So we rely on them like a Ranger or Marine unit would be on other Rangers or Marines. So we become exceptionally close with them. And that's exactly what I would expect from that unit.
And I'm curious about where not specifically where they are, but how they're doing today here in the States and how that's coming along. Because there have been some media outlets who have described these guys in the past as quote unquote death squads. I'm sure you've seen that stuff too, Mick. Is that going to make it hard for them to not? I don't mean for them. They're going to be able to integrate, and their kids are going to be able to integrate into the United States. But does that add like a layer of difficulty to this process when there's a certain perception out there like that that some have?
Yes, I think that's exactly right, Jack. We've seen. I live in Montana. There's already been pushback on some of the Afghans that are coming here because they're already here. What I would say is the people that we're having come to the United States have proven beyond what I think even most Americans have proven, that they're willing to fight for freedom, literal freedom. There hasn't been enough discussion on what they did. So 66,000 of them died fighting the Taliban. I understand at the end that it collapsed. I think that was as much on us as it was them. But they've proven their willingness to fight for ideals that are similar, if not exact, to the United States, and fight with our men and women, our military men and women. So I don't know who else would make a better American, personally. And they're going to do well. They're going to assimilate. They're extraordinarily family oriented. They understand that they're in a different culture, I think. There might be some hiccups. But we have that with all immigrants, including ours, right? I'm pretty sure we're of the same tribe from the Golden Isle, or the Emerald Isle. Sorry, not the Golden Isle. There's no gold out there, right? The Emerald Isle, and we had problems coming here. There was help wanted, no Irish need apply. We got here, so all I would say is it really is a call to the veterans, who are the best advocates for these folks, to say, No. They might be coming to a little town that's not used to outsiders coming here, but the soldier that fought in Afghanistan, vouch for these folks. So if you have a problem with them, then come talk to me. That's what we need veterans to do. And I think it'll be very short order, and people will be very happy that their town opened up their arms and embraced these folks. They're really good, and they're going to make great Americans.
And what's the next step for all of these folks that you and your teammates have helped bring over here? What's the resettlement process look like? What's the integration process look like for them?
So I'm an advisor. Dunkirk turned into an advisory group for Team America Relief. And so we're still very much involved in the effort and plan to in perpetuity, or as long as it takes. The resettlement part, I think, is going to be the long pole in the tent. We have thousands and thousands that need to be resettled. There, of course, is financial issues they have to deal with. There's language issues, educational, and that's going to go on for years. So I do believe there is an actual program that's looking for vets to sponsor these families, because they don't want to just stick them in one part of the country. They want to spread them around. And that's going to take people that are willing to, and from what I've seen, there are many, benevolent societies, church groups that are doing this. So, hats off to them. It isn't all negative. We have a lot of groups that are doing great stuff to get these folks integrated. It's just one of those things that's going to keep going for a long time. And the more help the effort gets, the better.
Well, no, thank you for sharing this with me, Mick. Is there anything else you think it's important for people to know about all of this?
Well, it's yes, there is. And I've been involved with several veteran advocacy groups that they have been working on the problem of major depression and suicide in vets. The statistics were quite frankly shocking. I hadn't any idea. One of the first conversations I had with this one group that operates an anonymous app, that allows veterans to be able to seek, psychiatric care immediately without expense. We had like 7,057 servicemen and women die in combat the last 20 years. We had 120,000 servicemen and women kill themselves in the last 20 years. So I bring that up. It's obviously an important issue, but there's concerns that there'll be a spike. And I was just talking to somebody else yesterday that had confirmed there has been a significant spike in suicides among our veterans as a result, they think, of this evacuation. There's a lot of people that quite frankly put their entire lives into fighting in Afghanistan, professional lives. They lost a lot of friends there, and now it doesn't seem like it was for anything. It seems like everything we fought for just disappeared. You could argue one way or another. I mean, I tend to agree that is the case, but for people who believe it, it makes them very depressed, a lot of them. And it's something that we should look out for because, you don't have to understand it. I think every vet understands it a bit. They might understand the actual taking of one's life. But it is something that's come out of this that everybody needs to address. And every vet can play a part of that. It's just, reaching out to friends that you haven't heard of for a while. And just being that, just direct, say, how you doing, man? You need to come out there. And if the guy doesn't answer correctly, maybe you get on a plane and go out there. I've talked to several who have done that, and they believe they actually, stop something from happening. So it's a tough topic to talk about, but I have seen it associated with this, and people who are experts in this have told me flat out there is a spike in that, and there's and suicides based on this actual evacuation and the way it took place.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. It's almost like, how could there not be? I don't want to talk about suicide as if it's inevitable, but I mean, the depression, the trauma, I mean, that is sort of inevitable. And I've certainly seen it with some of my friends as well, really struggling with, like you said, you devote years and years of your life to that. You see some really horrible things over there. And then you have to, now people are having to ask themselves some really difficult questions about the war in its totality.
Exactly.
We want to thank Mick Mulroy for his time and expertise in discussing the CIA and Afghanistan. To learn more about Team America Relief, go to teamamericarelief.org. This episode was edited by Rod Rodriguez, interview conducted by Jack Murphy. Don't forget to check out Stripes.com for all your news. Stripes.com, use promo code PODCAST and get 50% off your digital subscription. That's 50% off your digital subscription when you use promo code PODCAST. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
We'll see you at the next episode. Did you know that the Office of Financial Readiness has an app? Download Sense app. That's SEN $E. Sense app has the information you need for saving for retirement, building credit, creating a spending plan, or buying a home. FinRed has the tools you need. Download Sense app for tips on the go and follow at DoD FinRed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.